I've done several TED Talks before, but this is the first one that I'm actually doing on a topic which is very close to my heart. In a previous life, I used to be a banker and a consultant, lived a lot of long time in the US. And then I had a phenomenal experience. I went to the Himalayas. I spent several months there. And then I came back, quit, launched my own venture, and then begun these learnings, which sort of culminated in a book. And I think it's extremely important to talk about topics like the swastika today because we can spend our entire lives, or a fish can spend its entire life trying to fly and think of itself as a failure, but eventually it realizes actually it wasn't a bird to begin with, right? And that's pretty much where I see the Indian society today. A lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of young people who are forced to become entrepreneurs or who are forced to innovate and who are forced to try thinking. I mean, we just watched Sheryl Sandberg's talk. While that's very applicable in today's day and age for women, but how much of entrepreneurship and innovation is applicable from a US perspective to where we are as a country today, right? And that is where I started thinking, have we even understood our own country, the basis of the country and where we have come from? What's happening in Syria today with what ISIS is doing? It's destroying their monuments, it's destroying their arts, culture, literature, whatever they had. It's pretty much what happened in the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries with India, right? So it was strategic demolition of literature, arts, culture, and primarily mathematical knowledge. So a lot of people who talk about the swastika, and I've traveled across now, probably across 50 countries in the past couple of years, and everyone that you speak to about swastika, first of all, I've literally got arrested in Germany for even mentioning this word. I've got warned in California because people, sort of wanted to tell me that this is not the most pleasant thing. And I said, but I don't think you know what the swastika means. So they just go, well, no, we know because it's the Hitler symbol. I said, well, if it's the Hitler symbol, then why is it swastika? They have no answer. I said, forget that. What does it mean? They don't know, right? But they just hate it. So this is like the saying in Hindi, Begani Shadi Mein Abdullah Diwana. And I felt very hurt because a lot of people who talk about evidence and who talk about proofs rarely try to go and deep dive into the real concepts of what they are and why they are the way they are. And thus began my journey. So I spent time in Kedarnath. I met several rishis and realized masters. And they seem to know everything. It's just that it's not translated here. The very fact that we're in Patiala, in Punjab, I'm giving this TED talk in English, right? I mean, when would be the day that I can probably give this talk in Punjabi or in Hindi or in Sanskrit or whichever Indian language? Because this is the current narrative, right? So now coming back to the swastika, literally all the biggest Hollywood hits that I've come across are based on the philosophy of the swastika, right? And when I mention this to people, people are like, really? Are you like out of your mind, man? I mean, we thought you became an engineer, entrepreneur and everything, but you seem to have totally lost your mind. I said, well, think about it deeply. It's happening today as well. I don't know how many of you have read recently about turmeric latte in California. It's selling for $6 a beverage, right? $6 a cup. My mom has always given me haldi doodh, right? But the thing about India is we've never really patented anything. I grew up in Dehradun, so I know my basmati rice. I spent a lot of time in Texas, and I ended up buying a ranch house there. Started to cultivate rice, and realized that I wanted to sort of spread the whole idea of basmati, and I realized that the people already had something called Texmati. I said, but this is basmati. They said, no, we've got a patent on it. They recently lost the patent, but it was 10 times the price. Same thing happens with yoga. It goes to Spain, it becomes poga, and I can go on, right? That's pretty much the same thing that happened with respect to the swastika. Now, this is one of the basic learnings, and I loved Apurv Mishra's talk when he talks about Mahabharata, and the quote that was coming to my head was, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience right here, right? But in order to first understand that, we need to understand ourselves. So take a step back and start to feel where you're coming from. The basis of Western education is you start from the outside. So you start learning about things outside. This is a wall, this is a room, there are chairs, there's everything else. The basis of Eastern and especially Indian education starts from me, like self, the observer, right? And that starts with the breath, starts with pranayama, Then starts with, understanding your body, which is samvedna, right? So you have sensations in your body. Like, it's as simple as saying, can you explain to me the taste of water? I'll give you 10,000 words. Can anybody explain me the taste of water? None of you can, because that's something to be experienced. It's the same thing as thirst. It's the same thing that goes without saying. So there's a concept which you're trying to explain from something which is lesser, right? The West typically is a very bipolar world. When you go out and you say, well, I think I'm more inclined to supporting a BJP alliance than a Congress alliance, and people would go, oh, so you're a Republican. And you go, well, no, I'm not technically a Republican. I'm okay with this, and I'm okay with that, but I'm not okay with this. It's very hard to explain because that is a bipolar world. So you're trying to understand a bigger being, which is you, by a bipolar perspective. So what is the swastika? What is, this concept, the country called India? It's based on the philosophy of the swastika, right? Everything which is coming here is coming from something called Vedic mathematics. Most of you have not heard of it, or some of you have heard of it, probably have thought that there's some kind of a hazy concept, which is why it's been dismissed. Swastika is actually a 4-dimensional cube. And the idea behind getting this into being is to be able to explain to people what the 4th dimension is, right? So the 4th dimension comes from the 3rd dimension, 3rd dimension comes from the 2nd dimension, 2nd dimension comes from the 1st dimension. Now, everything you know of today is actually based on this philosophy. So we have 4 yugas, right? Satyug comes before Dwapar, Dwapar comes before Treta, Treta comes before Kalyug, right? Typically, that's where you are. There are 4 pairs in a day. There are 4 stages of life. So there's Balavastha, Yonavastha, Vridhavastha, and Vanprastha, right? So you can't just be born Yuva Avastha because Steve Jobs said so, right? You have to be born a kid, then you grow to be a youth. Your old age comes out from your youth, and your final stage comes out from the old age. And that's pretty much the cycle that it follows. So you got 4 seasons, right? One season can't come before the other. It's the same thing with the number of races in the world. We just got 4 races. So once you start understanding that philosophy, you'll suddenly realize that, I've been trying to distinguish this world between black and white and left and right and Republicans and Democrats and everything which is bipolar. But here's the frustration. India is a multipolar society. To say the least, it's a quadrupolar society, right? And then you get down to the basics of it and you start understanding the real philosophy behind it. So how do you get it, right? That basic understanding is through pranayama, right? And when you start the pranayama, you basically have 4 stages of awareness. So I'm awake, I'm asleep, I'm dreaming, and then I'm none of these 4 stages. That 4th stage is the Turiya Avastha. That movie Inception is basically Turiya Avastha. You're awake and asleep at the same time. You're conscious and unconscious at the same time. You're acting and you're not acting at the same time. So you're willfully acting, but you're not really acting, you're asleep, right? That Turiya Avastha, the word comes from Chaturya, which is the 4th state, right? And that is where a lot of our concepts sort of come in. So why is it important to talk about these things? Because they've literally been demonized and alienated by telling you that they have no scientific basis whatsoever. And this is where the entire philosophy comes in. If I don't understand where I'm coming from, I can't explain or I can't do really anything about the situation that I'm in today. I can't innovate anything because I don't really understand what my real problems are. So we're trying to solve problems which exist out there, but they're not our problems. And the problems that we really have, we have no idea. So recently, in the month of January, one of the Nobel laureates in chemistry came down to India, and he made a pretty stern statement that astrology is all rubbish, and so is Ayurveda. And I was thinking, forced to think that, well, my father was a gold medalist in mathematics. He was a physicist, and he was a geophysicist by profession, very analytical, objective person, but he was also an amateur Jyotishi, an astrologer, right? And so I started to, what piqued my interest was that how can this guy say, if he's a Nobel in chemistry, how can he say that these things don't really have any basis whatsoever? Because to my understanding, everything was very mathematical. So I started going in and realized the basis of everything that we have today, be it science, be it religion, be it modern science, is actually astrology. Because it comes from the perspective of the observer. So when the observer is observing, you literally observe the skies, you literally observe the universe from the observer's eyes. So the basis of time, when I say, let's hypothetically take the basis of the weekdays. The weekdays are named after 7 planets. But they're not the astronomical planets, they are the astrological grihas, which is basically Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn, and Sun, back again, right? So the 7. The Navgrahas that we find in the Shani temples is the 9 planets, which has all these 7, and then there's Rahu and Ketu. But there's a mathematical precision to it. It's not an arbitrary selection that people just say, well, you know, this is how we place the number of days and this is the sequence to it. The sequence is determined by the speed of the planet or the griha relative to the observer. So the moon is the fastest and sun is the slowest in a year, right? So the moon actually ends up completing its orbit around the observer in 30 days, whereas the sun completes it in 360 days, right? So it suddenly starts to make sense. So why is it important now? Because everything you're trying to do in terms of innovation, you're trying to get people to understand where to go, first you have to tell them where they're coming from. Which brings me to practical learnings of Bhagavad Gita. So the Satyug Bhagavad Gita, what does it say? The three primary questions is, मैं कौन हूँ, मैं कहाँ से आया हूँ, और मुझे कहाँ जाना है? Literally, who am I, where have I come from, and where am I going? And that's exactly what's happening in Kali Yuga as well. So that's Antrik Yuga. This is Yantrik Yuga. Now you open up Google Maps. What's the first thing you need to do? The assumption is you're a car. You could be a camel, you could be a horse, you could be walking as well. But it literally asks you, where are you coming from? Where are you going? If you get any of these 3 questions wrong, you got it totally wrong. So the point is, the basic philosophy is all being used even today. We just need to understand and realize the potential for ourselves. So with that, I present to you the philosophy of the swastika. Thank you very much.